Let's talk about different types of virtual reality as a function of what kind of medium is used to induce, to elicit the virtual simulation, the virtual experience. Let's particularly look at two types that are headsets versus so-called cave setups. Headsets you might be familiar with. So those are headsets like Oculus Rift or HTC Vive. They're sometimes also called head-mounted displays because they're mounted on your head. Sometimes they're called goggles. You place those on your head, and this means that you no longer see the actual world, but this real world, this actual world, is replaced by a digital, by a virtual equivalent. And they also often come with headphones, such that also you no longer hear sounds from the real world, but those are replaced with sounds that are sort of in line with what you see, what you experience in the virtual world. The nice thing about those headsets, especially in comparison with, for instance, the cave setup that I'll discuss later, is that you can take them to places. So a couple of years ago, some master's students in the CIS program, for their master's thesis, they took an Oculus Rift to the local library, and there they could reach a lot of people. So many people could experience their master thesis experiment. And this was relatively easy. You just have to take your laptop and those goggles with you. You can basically take them anywhere. There are even simpler headsets, actually, that don't make use of a laptop and a graphics card in a laptop, but they make use of your phone. You might also know those. So the smartphone, your smartphone here is the processing unit, and it also assures the display of this experience. So basically, you place your smartphone in this often plastic headset, and your smartphone basically runs it. And the nice thing about this way of mobile VR is that there are no cables involved. With those more expensive headsets like Oculus Rift, especially in the past, and HTC Vive, you would need cables to connect it to a laptop, for instance. In those cases, people just place this headset on their head. There are no cables attached, and it also works relatively well. Of course, the graphical quality is a bit lower than with those more expensive headsets that rely on the graphics card of your laptop or computer. But still, this works relatively well. A couple of years ago, when you bought a new Samsung phone, they offered you one of those Samsung Gear VRs. And then there's an even cheaper example of a headset, which is this so-called cardboard headset that was first launched by Google. This is very low cost. And what's actually nice about this is that it's really a do-it-yourself approach. So you put it together yourself, you place your phone inside, place it in front of your eyes. And if you have the right app, you can also have all sorts of VR experiences. So if you've never experienced VR before in your life, of course, I can talk about this for ages, but the nicest thing is to experience it yourself. And if you have never done this before, I would recommend buying one of those cardboard headsets. You place your phone inside. It's not too expensive, usually like 12 euros, 15 euros. And at least it makes you experience what VR can be like in quite an easy way, a low-tech way. Well, those headsets actually rely on binocular vision, which basically means the fact that we as humans have two eyes, and stereopsis, which basically means that our two eyes in everyday life, both by their nature, because they're in different places, have a slightly different view of the world. So if you close one eye and look at the world, and then close your other eye and have a look at the world, you see a slightly different thing, right? You see it from a slightly different angle. Your brain constantly combines those two information streams, those two visual information streams, into one 3D image of the world. Well, those VR headsets actually make use of this principle, because what they do is they offer different input to your two eyes, for instance, via your phone. If you use one of those applications on your phone, what you will see is that there are actually two images presented to your eyes, and they're slightly different. This sort of fools your brain into thinking that what you see on your 2D screen is actually 3D, because your brain is so used to combining the information that's available to your left eye with the information that's available to your right eye into a 3D image of the world. VR makes use of this principle when it comes to headsets. Another type of VR that does not make use of headsets is a so-called cave setup, a cave automatic virtual environment. And those setups, they are more expensive and they're not easily taken to a different place. So usually those setups make use of very large screens, projection screens or walls, and a virtual world is projected onto those walls, and the user is placed or the participant in an experiment is placed inside the space, close to those walls. So graphically, it can look a bit like this. So here in the middle, we have a user, someone in this virtual environment. There are large screens in front of the user and next to the user. And behind those screens, there are projectors that project a virtual world onto those screens that are surrounding the user. This setup, this cave setup, it talks about virtual environments, right? It's an acronym, VE stands for virtual environments. Sometimes people also call this mixed reality, because in those cases, you see the virtual world around you, but if you look down, you still see your own body. If you make hand gestures, you still see your own hand gestures. That's not the case, of course, with those VR head-mounted displays. There, your vision is blocked from the real world. If you make hand gestures, you no longer see your actual arms or hands. If you look down, you no longer see your actual body. And this is what such a setup can look like. So for instance, per screen, there can be 2 projectors combined for a higher quality, projecting onto one of those walls. And the user inside such systems typically wears relatively simple glasses. Those glasses allow for showing those virtual environments in 3D. So it's not just projected onto those screens, it really comes towards you as if you're really in this virtual world. And you can do all sorts of nice things in those environments. For instance, if you're a neuroscientist or a psychologist interested in what happens in people's brains when they're, for instance, in a virtual world, you can record, for instance, their brain activity in those cave setups. When you're using headsets, that's not so easy because already people have something, this large tool on their head. So it's not that easy to also attach some electrodes, as in this case, to record what's going on in their brains. So there are certain advantages, especially for research, when it comes to those cave environments compared to those headsets. Well, and then this is what an experiment might look like in such a cave. Participants may be placed either on a chair or they may be even walking around, interacting with virtual agents or avatars in those virtual worlds that they are surrounded by. Yeah, and here's a kind of creepy picture, perhaps. So this is what it could look like if you, in such an environment, you would be interested in collecting all sorts of data for an experiment for research. One final thing, what's nice about those setups, and actually also about many of the more expensive, more advanced headsets, is that if you move around as a user, actually the virtual world adapts to where you're looking. So if you bend over, you see a different virtual world than when you look up. So sort of the virtual world that's around you adapts to what you're doing. And this is allowed by so-called infrared cameras that constantly track what you're doing. So if you look to the left, this is being tracked because you're wearing those glasses with sensors on it. If you look to the right, those cameras are tracking that. So the virtual world can adapt to where you're looking. That's very nice. It creates a more immersive experience because also in everyday life, if you look at different places around you, what you see actually adapts to where you're looking, right? And there they are.